Imran, what's up?
What's going on, Kevin?
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, man. I see you are always busy on here, so I was like, let me jump on with you.
Yeah, I don't know why we didn't do it sooner.
Yeah, man. Let's throw it down. I'm excited.
Cool. So tell everybody a little bit about you and where you're from and your story.
So my name is Imran Jaffer, and I am actually born in San Diego, but I've lived in many different parts of the world, on the East Coast and the DC area, in Kenya and Uganda, in Africa. So with a little bit of some worldly experience, back here in San Diego and ready to take it on.
Yeah, you're always traveling. You're always in like Dubai, Kenya, London, New York. I mean, you're everywhere.
Yeah, I try to keep it interesting, right? You can't stagnate in one area, otherwise you don't get the wheels turning, right?
Yeah. So tell people what you do.
So I'm a little bit in two different industries. I straddle real estate and construction, which in my opinion, I think they sort of coincide, right? When the economy is good and real estate's great, you see construction industry booming. And then when the real estate market goes down, you also see construction go down. But we're in an interesting time because I feel like within the construction industry, predominantly in California, there's just a massive shortage of labor. So there's more projects than there are people or contractors to fill.
Just a little bit closer.
So, it kind of gets a little bit interesting with how the market is working at this very moment.
Yeah, the supply and demand thing is weird because a lot of people through COVID were getting stimulus checks. They weren't working. But in the construction industry, is that why there's a shortage or...
Yeah, I think, it's hard labor at the end of the day, right? Being a carpenter or an electrician or a plumber, if I told you, hey, you're going to have to, do some of that type of work versus being in the gig industry, because I feel like the gig industry today is giving a lot of these other industries a run for their money. If you're sitting in your car driving Uber or Uber Eats or, any of the other gig jobs, it's much easier to get into that than flip burgers at Burger King or be a carpenter where, you're having to put in time or, frankly, listen to other people and their problems. If you're sitting there behind the counter at a burger chain and, customers yelling at you, hey, I didn't get ketchup or I didn't get lettuce or whatever it is, versus just driving around in an Uber, there's a lot less hassle, and dollar for dollar, you probably make more in the gig industry.
Yeah, for sure. And you get to do it on your own time. So like you said, you don't have to deal with a boss. You can kind of do whatever you want. And there's always different opportunities too. So you can be working with 5 different apps at once. And it's a weird time we're living in.
It is. It's quite weird. So, when you think about the economy, it's like there's a high demand for jobs in the lower end sector. But then on the higher end sector with the tech companies, I mean, you just see Coinbase today laying off, a whole bunch of staff.
Yep.
I think you'd mentioned in one of your other Instagram videos, like BlackRock laying off staff. Most of the tech industry is laying off staff. I think the number
Goldman
for this
Sachs.
month is 200,000 people are losing their jobs, right? It's going to be interesting because there's not tech companies that are hiring right now. Everyone's laying off. So what's going to happen to these people, right? Who knows?
Well, I'll tell you that, I invest in a lot of auto detail shops and service-based businesses. And the biggest complaint is, we have a good amount of work, but we don't have employees to help do the work, or we can't retain employees because they want to go off and do all these other things. I think that's going to end here soon because you're going to see people with master's degrees who are out of a job, who are now looking for work. And it's going to be similar to 2008 where you had these guys working at Burger King, just trying to pay the bills.
I believe it. And, I think the skill set is just going to change, right? Everyone wants to be this, Instagram star or, do everything online. But a lot of that's going to change, right? People are going to have to figure out how to, use the real life tools in this day and age, right?
Yeah.
And, with things like Chat GPT coming up, it's going to take over a whole bunch of positions, right? Imagine being able to go online and your customer support now is all AI.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
You're not going to need those people in the call centers. You're not going to need a lot of those extra, employees that companies had to have, right? Well, we'll see what happens, right? It's going to be an interesting future for both of us, right?
Yeah.
Because we're going to be in it, and we got to leave it in a better place, or we're going to be left behind.
Yeah, and I think that it's an opportunity, right? Like change is inevitable. People get scared by it, but when change happens, it sort of levels out the playing field. And if you can be first to something like AI, or even in the beginning, right? There's so many people that I remember when I first started running Facebook ads, it was like nobody else was doing it, right? And then now everybody's running Facebook. And that's only 6 years, 7 years, So I think that as AI kind of grows, I think less jobs will actually be removed and they'll just be a lot more efficient. So I think people will still work with AI, but I mean, obviously at some point it's going to get so smart and it's going to learn so much faster. It's going to be able to do a lot, and people are going to be working on passion projects. I don't know.
Yeah, and talking about passion projects, I think that's kind of where the niche is going to be, right? Artists creating, unique things, musicians creating unique music, whether it's in rap or country or whatever genre, right? But, having that creative element to almost any service job is going to be where people will, come out from being like, hey, I just do car detailing to I do car detailing, but with this art form. And
right.
It's going to, attract more people, where it's like, I wrap cars, but I wrap cars with my, custom art, and, there's going to be more of a want for that. Right. But who knows? Let's see what happens here in the near future. Right.
Yeah. I think experience is what people pay for. So like with Netflix, right? Movie theaters still exist, but the ones that are booming are the luxury movie theaters where, Netflix, you can go watch a new movie at home. Most of the movies, people aren't going to a movie theater unless there's an experience attached, like nice sofas, they deliver food, things like that. So I think the higher end experience-based things will stick, but the as supply and demand changes and new things come into play, like things that we can't even imagine right now, like nobody really in the 50s or 60s was thinking about, not too far in the future we'll be just watching all these movies at home instantly the second they come out.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And, it's funny because the new Avatar movie just came out, right? And there was a huge debate on, like, are people going to come back to the theaters to watch it? And I think just a few days ago, they said that they're already at, like, $1.8 billion in revenue. And it's like, yeah, well, they did come out and we're hitting our numbers. And, that movie drew in the crowd that they were expecting, right? In a post-COVID world where, it was sort of up in the air. It was up in the balance. But you're right, because Avatar came with that quality. It comes with that experience, the amount of time, effort, and, mechanics that they put into it has really changed the game in how you shoot or develop on-screen movies, right?
Right. Yeah, experience wins, and people want to be around people. That's the thing is there's a convenience factor, which is why Grubhub does so well, why Instacart and all of these convenience-based businesses work. But then on the experience side, people still want to go to the movies. They want to grab their popcorn. They want to sit down.
Yeah.
As much as they hate it, they want to hear somebody's phone ringing just to remember that we're all in this.
Yeah.
I think people want to be around other human beings. I think it's only natural. And COVID showed how detrimental it is to people when you're not around other human beings.
Oh, totally. I totally agree. I mean, what it's done to our school systems and everything, we're pretty much 2 years behind, right? In terms of learning and, aptitude for, most of the Americans that, were out of school system or just didn't have the support to be able to bridge the gap with that education for those couple of years, right? Whether it's internet access or politics or, there's so many different factors at play, but, it's going to be a little bit more time before we actually see the negative impacts, and we're already starting to see it just in testing scores and other aptitudes that they have out there. But let's see, what happens. Will this generation catch up? Will sort of these AI technologies or, technology just in general push them to, work a little harder, or will they get complacent?
Right.
Who knows? Right.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see how the kids that are between 1 and 6, how they dealt with or how they're going to deal with the mask situation, right? Is you're in this developmental age where you're learning about facial features and the way people move their face and smile. And there's 2 years where you're out in public and almost everybody you see, you can't see that piece of the face. I wonder if they're either going to get really good at it because they got really good at reading the eyes, or if there's going to be some kind of issues long term from that age group. I think that's going to be interesting.
I mean, there's going to be so many different issues that come about just from the whole pandemic and, mask, no mask, vax, no vax. I mean, there's, at this point you can sit here and dissect everything that happened a couple years ago, and, you can, put everyone on a cross to say, hey, here's all the bad decisions you make, and here's all the great decisions that were made during that time. But, we can't change what happened, right? And we just got to figure out how to iterate and move forward from that, right? Not to get political, but, it does come back to getting into politics when we talk about the pandemic and, a bunch of these stories, right?
Yeah, and I think it's less politics and it's more tribalism, right? People are always going to pick a side, right? There's the people that wanted the mask, the people that didn't want the mask, and there's always going to be something for people to fight over, and politics is just a way of us identifying what tribe we're a part of, and then there's sub-tribes in all of those tribes, right? So we're not much better than we were when we were cavemen. We're just a little more sophisticated, and we have nuclear weapons. So
That's true. I feel like we're still saber rattling with each other, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you've ever seen anybody get into a car and see how they act on the freeway, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So, yeah. So, anyways, I think San Diego is a fantastic place. My wife and I, we moved here a couple of years ago, and it's really grown on us. It was very different when we first moved here during the pandemic, and to see this city reflourish into what it's become, and to experience everything from the nightlife to the people to the vibe of how chill it is and the business environment. Coming from an outsider, it can seem pretty like relaxed, especially coming from the East Coast where, New York, DC, everyone's on it,
Yep.
People are, dressed up to the nines in their suits, going at it, and then here everyone's a little bit more chilled out,
Yep.
hanging out, surfing in the morning, snowboarding in the evening.
Yeah.
And you're like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But there is still a sense of drive. There's still a sense of work. People are not in your typical industries, right? They're doing things slightly different. They've figured out a model that is sustainable for that type of lifestyle.
Right.
Right. Like Airbnbs and short-term rentals, right? So we're involved in a couple of them, and it's such an interesting model. And specifically here in San Diego, we've got tens of thousands of Airbnbs and short-term rentals, and it also creates a housing problem.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there's legislation that just passed that is going to require you to now have a permit to operate a short-term rental, and
Yep.
there's it's going to be like a lottery system. So all of these beautiful homes in La Jolla or in Mission Beach or in PB, how are these guys that have these investments currently running, how are they going to have to iterate and make sure that they're part of this new system that's put in place, right? Because you do make quite a good sum of money, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with some of these short-term rentals here in this area.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see where the push came for that. Is it like the Hiltons, the hotel industry pushing money with lobbyists or something to make these political decisions? Because I don't know anybody that really hates it, unless you're you have a $20 million house and now some rich 19-year-old kids are partying in an Airbnb next to you. But yeah, where do you think the push came from for the legislation?
I think that there's a shortage of housing here, specifically in this market. If you look at our average rent here in San Diego, it's ridiculously high compared to the national average, right? So they had to figure out legislation on how do we cut back on the number of vacation rentals, because the vacation rental business in this market specifically is super good, right? So around Airbnb and short-term rentals, there's all of these resources you have. So you have Guestly, you have AirDNA, and you have a bunch of different companies that support Airbnbs, okay? And one of the resources that's out there is like you can go in and you can type in a zip code, okay? And what they'll do is they'll use all the data points from Airbnb and say, hey, within this zip code, you can look at properties in this price range, and here's the projected return. And so that's very interesting because in an area like San Diego, you have tourism almost 12 months out of the year, right? And that's not the same for every single market. So let's talk about like Aspen, Colorado, right? If you own an Airbnb in Aspen, you know that you're going to really kill it during your winter months where people are coming in to go skiing and snowboarding, and, you know, they're there for the winter time, right? You have a log cabin in the mountains, right? Your demographics and your time to earn your return on your vacation rental is very different than being in a, you know, a city like San Diego where it's like 70 and sunny all year round.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of interesting. Or if you're like in the DC area, you know, the demographics is your business traveler or your family traveler that wants to be in that area, and the demographics and the numbers are very different. The cost of property, the dollar per square foot that you are purchasing for versus how much you're able to put it on the market for, right? And then there's markets like Arizona where they're very tricky. You know, you saw a huge spike in home sales, and now all of a sudden all these places are, you know, sort of what we call underwater mortgages.
Right.
People have these very low interest rates. They have these payments, but now their value of their home is worth 30% less than what they bought it for.
Yep.
So yeah, I understand you can make your payment because you have a fantastic interest rate at 2.99, but you're in an underwater mortgage. Like,
yeah,
it's ridiculous, right?
Right.
So, you know, each market's going to face its own sort of crippling effect, right?
Yeah.
But who knows? You know, it's the economic situation at this point, in my opinion, is going to be very interesting. Like we were talking about earlier, you've got a huge demand in the service industry jobs. You've got, you know, layoffs in the tech and the high end jobs. So once people start missing their mortgage payments and the rental payments, and, you know, a couple of these things start to snowball, how's that going to look for the property market? What opportunities are going to open up? You know, this guy, Nathan Rothschild.
Yep.
One of the most famous sayings, he's like, when there's blood in the streets, buy property, right? So blood in the streets meaning, you know, when there's a bloodbath and, you know, the economy is falling apart, and, you know, we're already seeing the stock market tank, the Fed's raising interest rates to a ridiculous amount. It's going to be interesting, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully you're there on the sidelines with me to start buying up some property.
So let's talk about your real estate. So you own real estate in Kenya. You have Airbnbs here in the States. Tell me a little bit about how you got into that and why real estate.
So I initially read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Have you read that book?
Yeah.
Robert Kiyosaki.
Yep.
So in that book, he talks about the fast lane. And the fast lane is technically the slow lane. Right. So when he talks about real estate, he talks about it in a long-term aspect. So he's like, if you're going to touch real estate, it's like a 10-year play. If you're looking at like getting gains in 1 or 2 years, yes, people make phenomenal gains in the short term, but how long does that last? It's not a very, you know, a quick metric is not a very good one to gauge yourself at.
Yep.
So initially when I made a little bit of money, I was selling bulldozers.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I sold
in Kenya.
Yeah, I sold some bulldozers to a buddy of mine in Uganda, and you know, we're shipping them out from Baltimore, and they were arriving into East Africa. So I made a little bit of money early on, and then I decided, hey, let's take this and invest it into real estate. And so I did that, and it sort of worked out. We were able to put up a couple commercial properties, gain some traction with that, built a little investment fund, moved into the apartment sector with having some apartment complexes, and then moved back into commercial, opened our construction business, and 10 plus years later, we're sitting here in San Diego, building our construction firm out here, Ace Group, California Construction. And so, if you need any commercial construction needs, we'll be up and running hopefully before the end of this month in quite a big way. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're killing it, dude.
Thank you, man. Trying to, we got to catch up to guys like you, right? You're in the sales business, but I think every business has sales aspect to it, right? So you can be in the service industry, but if you can't fill your funnel and you can't fill it with the right clients, then you're just going to be spinning your wheels, in my opinion. So
how are you dealing with the labor shortages? Is it affecting you?
Yeah, it is. It's affecting everyone. It's hard to keep people within your circle of influence to continually work for you, because there's so much opportunity. It's not like the old days where it's like, hey, if we take care of you, you're going to be able to do so much for us, right? So it's being able to balance and say, hey, so-and-so, whenever we have projects, come on board with us, and we're going to give you better than market rate.
Yeah.
And after our projects are done, please feel free to venture out into the abyss and get more work, because you can't hold people back. Right? You got to let them go after what they need.
Now, how much of it is money based, right? Like, I see Taco Bell hiring at like $22 an hour starting, just unreal, right? But that, when you talk about supply and demand, if you're paying them more, then the more you pay them, the less they're going to want to go somewhere.
Yeah. So, it's all based on monetary compensation, right? And it's probably the same for you, right? If you're paying somebody slightly more, they're going to want to come back to you. But it's finding the right people. So you can pay somebody, twice market rate, but if they don't deliver the service,
right,
why would you pay somebody double, right? So having to find the right people. So the first time we did a tiling job here in San Diego, halfway through the tiling job, I was like, guys, we got to stop, and we're done for the day. I had to go in there and demo all the work, because based on my experience, I was like, these guys don't know what they're doing.
Right.
It's going to come out sloppy. I'd rather cut my losses at this point and, find a different team altogether.
Right.
Right. And I had to do that 2, 3, 4, 5 times until I found a right group for tiling. I found a right group for carpentry. I found a right group for concreting. And so now I have a few teams that are, really good at these different aspects of construction, right? So you can't do everything with one or two people. You have to find, the crews that are really good at certain areas, right? And construction's huge. There's so many classifications that you can go through. There's so many other subcontractors. You don't want to just hire somebody like, oh, I know electrical. No. You got to get, somebody that's licensed, that's been in the industry for a while, that knows what they're doing, that has some backing, or, who's, been referred to you. So that's kind of how it goes. And then you're right. People are charging more, especially in this market. Because earlier I told you there's more work in California than there are service providers to fill the need.
Yep.
So...
which is good if you're you.
Yeah, it is. And then, it comes down to the fact that you have to be able to learn how to, go after the business, right?
Right.
So, if you fill out 0 bids, you're going to get 0 business.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the law of averages at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that you're paid based on what you provide in value to the market, right? And then the ease of replacing you and your ability to negotiate. So when people are getting laid off from their jobs like crazy right now, what do you think is the most important thing for somebody to understand about, because they're going to have to go out and hunt, they're going to have to go out and provide their own income outside of where they are now, and I don't know how much availability there's going to be on Uber and other platforms. You've seen them limit it before when things like this happen. So, what would you say to somebody who just got fired or thinks they're going to get fired and needs to make either a side hustle or a full-time hustle outside of their job?
So I think the easiest way to make any type of cash is in sales, hands down.
Yep.
And then, each funnel is different, right? It's like how defined can you get in sales, right? Are you just selling cars? Anybody can start selling cars. It's a very easy sales industry job to get into versus, being able to sell medical devices. You have to learn a little bit more, and there's a little bit more education or, thought process that has to go into that, or even real estate. And, the SKUs get smaller and smaller the more defined you get into sales, right? But if you can hone into some of those skills or start, adapting yourself to have that secondary income within a sales structured job, that could really, sort of pull the socks up for you when things sort of hit the bottom, right? I was reading a statistic the other day that said it's like 56% of Americans cannot cover $1,000 emergency bill.
Isn't that crazy?
It's insane, right? We're busy buying Louis Vuitton and Gucci and all of that.
Yeah.
Bernard Arnault, like, he's the richest guy right now. I know Elon was before, but since the Tesla stock price has gone down, it just goes to show that we're ready to show everybody that we're wearing all of these brand names.
Yeah.
And we've got this guy super rich, and, but we can't cover $1,000 emergency bill. Like, something came up, or a medical bill came up, or, you had a fender bender and you need to cover it. It's insane to me.
People are too busy looking rich and not getting rich or being rich, right? They want to look the part, but which is just crazy, because why would you want to look rich and then trip when you pull out your credit card or debit card somewhere to make a transaction? Like, I would rather look like decent, right? Not poor, but I would rather look like I maybe shop at Gap or, whatever, like regular ass clothes, and be completely confident and comfortable and know that I'm set. Like, I feel like the ego takes people for such a ride where they feel like I have to put up this image to make them feel, and again, it comes down to like tribalism, right? Yeah. And all of this caveman behavior of like, I have to be the strongest, the best, you know?
What are they going to think about me? And it's like, we're living in other people's thoughts, right? Like, their thoughts don't put food on our table, right? So it's very interesting, and you're totally right. It comes back to, that primitive behavior versus not everybody is as comfortable as you saying, hey, I want to just go to Target and I'll wear, tees from Target or from the Gap, and it doesn't have to have the name plastered all over me.
Well, I mean, when I see somebody with Gucci on or Louis Vuitton on, first I just assume it's fake, right? I don't know why. I'm like, nah, it's probably not real. But if it's real, I'm like, because you see them pull out their keys and they've got like an old Mercedes key, right? And they went out and financed an old C-Class at 28% interest. And guess what? I've been there. I remember, and I wasn't wearing designer clothes and stuff, but the first time I bought a BMW, it was for other people. It wasn't for me.
It wasn't for you, right?
Nah, everywhere I went, I was so insecure. And I wanted everybody to think that I was this baller. And I spent all of my money trying to look like it. And eventually I changed that. Eventually I realized, wait, I'm super stressed. This doesn't make sense. Let me go refocus and start actually getting rich. And the second that I made that decision to live for myself and actually go get rich, the second I stopped feeling like shit and being poor, Yeah,
it's just being able to be comfortable with yourself, understanding what your financial goals are. But it comes down to discipline. Having that, it's easy for us to sit here and say, we don't care about what other people think, and but that's just how society works. It comes with a different set of discipline. Your mindset has to be in a certain level. It's all got to be in sync, right? Like somebody like yourself, you're sober, you don't drink, you don't do a lot of those things that society shows as a norm, like going out to the clubs and, buying bottles and, showing that exuberance, right? So you don't have to worry about that. A lot of that is in sync for you. And for a lot of other people, or most of the people, it's not in sync, right? And it's like, how do you I feel like we all have these dials, right? And we got to like constantly, turn them and switch them and like gauge them to like be number one, happy. It's like, if you're happy just within your own skin, everything that happens outside of you, you can turn that energy positive, right?
Right.
You can turn a bad thing into a good thing, right? It's just based on how you're able to manage that situation, right?
Yep.
You miss a flight. Are you going to yell at the, person at the counter? Or are you going to be like, hey, I know you got all the other people to deal with. I feel for you. It's not your fault. It's not like you went and, canceled the flight, because it's not their fault, right?
Yeah.
It's like how you deal with them. So I missed a flight, and guess what? They put me on the very next one. And everybody else that was super upset and, yelling, they didn't get that opportunity. Just the way that they act or reacted, right?
Yeah.
So being able to control those emotions and everything, it just comes, I guess, with age, maybe.
Yeah. Well, How to Win Friends and Influence People, a really good book that you need to read if you have not read it. Have you read it?
Yes, I have.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
a fantastic. Dale?
Dale Carnegie, I think?
Yeah, exactly.
I think so. Yeah. So anyways, really, really, really good book. My old boss, Dave Selenow, told me that it was the best book he ever read. And I had heard it from other people. I'm like, all right, whatever. Maybe this is just, it just sounds like such a how to win friends and influence people. Okay, whatever. And then I read it and was like, holy shit. When you think about it, and let's circle back to the luxury lifestyle and showing off for other people. When you understand how people operate and how people work, you think that they're looking at you like, look at this guy, he's so cool. He's got the G-Wagon, he's got the luxury clothes, he's going on private jets. They don't like that. They wish it was them, and they get mad at you that it wasn't them. They might smile, they might act like they're supportive, and some people will be supportive, but most people don't like that. And when you realize that when you're talking to somebody and you're talking about yourself, right?
Yeah.
People want to hear you talk about them, right?
Yeah.
Everybody loves to talk about themselves and hear people talking about themselves, right?
Totally. I totally agree with you. And, I think that social media like Instagram and all of these other platforms, what they've been able to do is magnify this sort of quote unquote luxury lifestyle, right? I could portray to you a world in which I live that doesn't exist just by, taking certain videos or pictures or whatever it is to say, hey, followers, here's my lifestyle. And I could be living on a shack on the side of the road, right? And that's very interesting because you're right. Everyone wants that lifestyle. Nobody shows you the sacrifice or the hard work that they put in. You don't see people, with beads of sweat, coming down their face, all dirty and covered in whatever it is in hard work,
Yep.
Saying, oh, this is how I got to that private jet, right?
Yep.
They're just showing you them sitting, sipping on a glass of champagne there. They don't show you, what it took, right? And so unless we're able to realize that we can make those sacrifices, do we then get to enjoy the rewards of the hard work, right? Jay-Z has a very interesting line in this song, right? Where he's like, I made my first, couple $1 million, and he went and bought, this beautiful exotic car. And he's like, at the same time that he purchased that car, real estate in the Bronx was as expensive.
Yep.
And, had he bought the real estate instead, he would be worth, 10, 20 times that amount. But, society wants you to go after the flashy car, after the diamond chain. And, that's where they want to sort of keep you at, right? They don't want you to think about, hey, what do I sacrifice today to earn tomorrow, right?
Yep.
It's, again, coming back to wearing the Louis and the Gucci, right?
That song is, I know what you're talking about. He's talking about buying a building in Dumbo. Down under the Manhattan Bridge overpass. And he's like, yeah, that same building is now, it was worth $1 million. The same building now is worth $12 million. How you think I feel, Dumbo?
Exactly. That is exactly the line.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show that, hey, like, we're sitting here in this position, and, I want to be able to sit down with you and call you in the next 20 years when I'm 50 something and be like, hey, Kevin, let's reflect on the conversation we had, what did you do? What are some of the sacrifices you made 20 years ago? And hopefully we can have that conversation over coffee or a tea sitting in some exotic part of the world and say, hey, because I sacrificed, we can do this, right? It'd be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, let's use the Jay-Z example of him buying a car instead of buying real estate and looking back at that and being like, fuck, that was a terrible investment. But now he's not going to make that mistake again. I think the biggest mistake is people consistently make recurring mistakes and they don't learn from it, you know, and also learn from other people's mistakes. But some of these experiences, I feel like you have to go through. Like if I look at anybody that's made a good amount of money and they didn't come from money, typically they start out wasting it. They start out buying dumb shit thinking it's going to make them happy, and then they realize, oh, money doesn't make me happy, it just expands what I already am. So if you're already happy and enjoying the process, then money can help that. But if you're miserable, it's going to do that. And the cars, it's temporary, you know.
Isn't that the definition of insanity? It's like doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Yeah. So no, I totally agree with you. But there's this saying, it's like, you want to fail fast, you want to fail forward, and then you learn from those failures, right?
Yep.
If you're not able to pick yourself up and just change a little bit, everyone has these goals and dreams, and we're sitting here at the beginning of the year. I don't know if you've reset some new goals for the year and re-engaged in your vision board, but I do that every year. Sit down and say, hey, here's where we want the end of the year to be. We'll hit some goals, but we get them so that even if we don't hit them 100%, we're still better off because we know the direction that we're headed in, right? And we know that along the road, you're gonna trip up, you're gonna fall, but being able to have the mental stability to just pick yourself up in those tough times. It's very difficult when you fall, people want to kick you when you're down, right? So having that mental strength actually is what you need to be able to pick yourself up and brush yourself off and continue going after what you want to go after, because not everyone's going to see your vision the way that you see it. Right.
Yeah.
And it's difficult, right? When everyone around you is like, oh, but he's not in a nice car, or he's not doing this, and he's never going to make it, or whatever it is. And a lot of people go through that, right? Whether you're coming out with your first rap album, or you're working on your first company, or you're just gotten into sales, and it's a very uphill climb, right?
Yeah. And Brad Lee was talking about some of the rich people that he knew, right? All these guys, they've got McLarens, Ferraris, big ass houses, but what he realized is these guys, they've got all these things, but they're broke. They're just broke at a different level, and they're not happy, right? They've got the Ferrari, they got the private jet, but they're fucking tripping on not paying that private jet payment, right?
Yeah.
They don't own that cash. They don't own the Ferrari cash. And when the money kind of slows up and now they can't pay all their bills and their cars get repoed, now they feel like their life is crumbling. I would much rather take that money. And look, I've wasted a lot of money, but any dollar that I put back into my business is a much better investment than putting into some luxury clothes or cars. And don't get me wrong, I like cars,
and you like bikes too.
Yeah, I got a couple of those, but I think it's important to celebrate your successes, but not divulge in your ego too much.
No, I agree. You have to celebrate your successes. You have to, it's one of those things where it's like there's a balance between like being overly egoistic and then celebrating your successes, right? So you don't want to be like boastful, but you also want to be like, hey, I worked hard and here's what I achieved. Right. And it rubs people the wrong way sometimes, but if you can't put yourself up on a pedestal when you win, I think that's very important, right? It's also a good feeder for happiness, right? To make sure that, you can keep on going. And then also to realize that, hey, you're on that pedestal, where's the next step? You know? And to like keep on engaging in that so you don't stagnate, right?
Yeah.
And then one thing that you definitely brought up is, every dollar you put back into your business. I think that's one piece of thing that a lot of people don't do is they forget to invest in themselves.
Yeah.
Right. And once you start realizing that you are the main person to invest in, then, your life, gets a lot better. Right. whether
Yeah.
it's investing in your education, in your skill set, in, you know, whatever it is that you're, you know, going after. I think it's very important for people to do that.
Yeah, if you don't know how, if your goal is to make more money and you don't know how to make more money, you need to now learn how to learn. You need to learn how to find info that you can then learn from, right? So whether that's YouTube, whether it's a mentor, learning is a skill, right? And once you learn how to learn, you learn how to filter data, what's bullshit, what's not. And when you get good at those things and you continue to just pursue knowledge and then constantly invest in yourself with skills, buying courses, mentorships, reading books, and then applying what you learn, your life will change overnight. The problem that I see is most people sit in the same spot and they think somebody's coming to rescue them, and no one's coming.
Yeah.
No one's coming.
Trust me, I've been waiting for that person to throw me a $1 billion lifeline too.
Very nice, you know. But it also wouldn't, right? Because
Yeah.
when you see people win the lottery and they get all of this money out of nowhere, again, if you're not a happy person, you're not going to be happy with $1 billion.
I agree with you. And also, I think that there's a lot more happiness that comes from, you know, just putting in the effort, right? You know, when you persevere and then you finally see a break in the clouds and, you know, you get a payday or whatever, you know, it sort of gives you that like boost to say, hey, everything that I've been doing up to that point is sort of worth it, right?
Yeah, and that's why sacrifice is an investment, right? You're
Yeah.
sacrificing short-term dopamine hits, you know, whether it's going out and spending money, buying things, whatever, right? For the long-term payoff of, you know, investing back in yourself.
Yeah. And, you know, talking about investments, you know, you don't even have to recreate the wheel, right? There's so many greats, like you talking about learning, you know, just read up on Buffett, you know?
Right.
He always has so much great information for young people. Like, just start investing in ETFs. He's like, it'll outperform any other company, outperform any other market that you may think that is better. And he's like, just stay consistent. And, you know, long-term consistent growth is better than, you know, hitting the lottery, right? It's making those daily sacrifices, right? And it's not like you're sacrificing everything, but it's like the small sacrifices on a daily basis can compound to, you know, when you look at it in 10 years, you're like, oh, wow, what happened?
Right.
You know? But if you don't start now, you know, you're already behind, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people, they sit there and they're like, oh, I should have done this last year. I should have done that the year before. Or when the interest rates were better, we should have done this. And it's like, just start now.
Right.
Like, don't
Yeah.
worry about the past. Like, learn from it. And then, you know, start today. And then, you know, hopefully if you continue to make those daily sacrifices, you're going to be in a way better place in, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 decades from now, right?
Right.
If we're still alive.
Yeah.
I'm definitely hoping to be. So
Yeah, well,
I know
hey.
you always say, you know,
Reminder, you're gonna die, so just, you know, like, live life. Don't forget to go out and dude, I'll tell you a story that I
tell me a story.
recently remembered that I just had forgotten and buried. There was one time where I was working at a restaurant in the north end of Boston, Italian section, nice luxury Italian restaurants, a little
Yeah.
bit of mob stuff here and there, but very, very small neighborhood. And I was having a drink after work, and I went in there. This is probably 10 years ago now, almost 10 years ago, close to it. Wow. And I'm in here, I'm having a drink, and I'm sitting here, and this guy is sitting across the bar. It's only like maybe 8 people in this whole place. And it's like a bar, nice restaurant kind of place. And he buys everybody a round of limoncello, right? Which is like a fancy little drink. And, you know, I drank it. Oh, cool. And I went over to introduce myself, like, hey, nice to meet you, whatever. And we talked. And, you know, his girlfriend who's sitting there is like, oh, like, you know, do you know who this is? And I'm like, no, you know. And she's like, he's a billionaire. And he's like, stop, like, being all like, stop telling people that, you know, I don't, you know. Seemed like a pretty humble guy. And we start talking, and he's asking me, you know, what are you doing? And at the time I was thinking about going into real estate, working in a restaurant at kind of a point, like a split in my life. And he's like, oh, like, you know, do you travel much? Asking me, you know, all these things. And we just had kind of a deep conversation about life, you know. And he was just a genuine guy, and I didn't want anything from him. It was just cool to like sit down and have a connection with somebody. And this guy said something. He was like, I had throat cancer, and it made me get throat cancer to realize that you need to stop and smell the roses, right? He's like, luckily I had a very rare thing that was caught very early, and it's good, whatever. But he's like, just don't forget, like, through your whole life, like, you really need to smell the roses and stop, no matter what you're doing. You need to stop, enjoy life, have gratitude, and just be in the moment, because you never know when it's going to stop. Damar Hamlin, who had that cardiac arrest on the field, there was an interview that went viral of him before that, and he was like, man, I just cherish every moment because you never know when it's gone. And just goes to show, and luckily he survived. But, and then this guy said, after we talk about this, that right there was it, him saying, you got to stop and smell the roses. And then he's like, hey, you work in a restaurant, right? You can always go back and get a restaurant job. He's like, where do you want to go? I'm like, Italy. He's like, okay, I'm going to cut you a $10,000 check right now. You go anywhere in the world you want, but you got to quit your job and you got to book your flight now. And I was like, what?
That's awesome.
And at this point I had like maybe $200 to my name,
yeah.
And I'm like, this dude's going to give me 10 grand. Like, and he just sat there. He's like, you don't have to take it, but if you want, go quit your job right now and book your flight right now. And you got to go.
Wow. And did you do it?
Didn't do it.
Oh my God,
Pussied out.
Well, I guess you're gonna have to do that for someone in the
maybe
future.
Maybe he
now.
was gonna have me robbed and kidnapped, and he wasn't even a billionaire. I don't fucking know, dude. Like something seemed off about it. But
good-looking guy like you, definitely.
It's just something felt off. But I looked him up. He was a billionaire angel investor from Canada, from Toronto.
Oh wow, we should totally look him up and have him on this podcast.
That would be. So I actually tried to contact him a couple times because he gave me his card and his email and because he was like, oh, here's my email. You have 24 hours to like get this decision done, you know? And I sent him an email and was like, hey, I think I'm going to hold off, whatever. And then he never responded. I think he kind of was like, well, this fucking kid's going to, go off and do whatever he's going to do. And, a couple times I emailed him over the years, just giving him updates, never got a response, but, oh, hey, I ended up quitting my job and I got this job in finance and now I'm making, 6 figures. Yeah. And I think part of that was because of our communication and, every time I've taken another step up in life,
you sort of send him an email.
Yeah, he probably doesn't even remember me, but that's we're gonna have to do that.
We will totally have to do that. And then when he comes, I have a very good friend that makes their own limoncello up in La Jolla.
Oh yeah,
this wonderful
alcohol
restaurant.
Free.
Well, I mean, you'll probably have to just watch us have it.
There we go. I can do that. Yeah.
We'll give you some lemonade.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. I'm sure there's alcohol-free limoncello. I miss limoncello because it was one of the alcoholic drinks that I would only have one of, because I don't know who's
it's quite
pounding
sweet.
limoncello.
It's a after dinner aperitif type of thing. You know, clears the palate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. Well, Imran, can you share one last positive message to our listeners and viewers?
So, coming back to your quote on your arm, I think that, it's just very important for all of us to just think about the journey until that point, right? It's what are you going to do between now and then, right? How are you going to fill your glass up, to make sure that you have enough gratitude, happiness, love. And love is both ways. So you have to receive and give, and if you could fill all of those up, then everything else will sort of fall into place, right? We've been focusing today a lot of our conversation on money, and it's a sort of byproduct of everything else that you do in life, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, you could give somebody $1 million or $1 billion, and it's just not going to change their happiness, right?
Yeah, temporarily.
I'm
going to tell you, you give me $1 billion right now, the next month is going to be wild. Well, Imran, thank you so much for coming by. We're going to have to do a round 2. I feel like I have a lunch meeting that's scheduled for right now, but
no worries, man.
We're going to definitely have a round 2.
Thank you for having me on here, man.
Yeah, dude, absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. My name's Kevin Pheley. If you're not following me on social, please give me a follow. Also, if you're not subscribed to this podcast, subscribe, whether you're watching this on YouTube, whether you are listening to it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Please leave a subscribe and share this with one person. I'm out.